Hey folks, welcome to the Did You Know Crypto podcast. Today we're going to be having Pierre Rochard back on. He was here for episode 14 to talk about the scaling debate, and now he is back on to talk about Lightning. I also had another episode about Lightning a few weeks back, episode 30 with JW Weatherman. Overall, I'm very excited about Lightning. I do have some concerns and questions, which we do talk about in this episode. So I really think it's very helpful for people who don't quite know what this is or have heard things about Lightning and have questions about it. This will be a good overall episode for you to listen to. If I could ask you real quick to do a few things for me, if you could go over to iTunes and leave a 5-star and a written review, that really helps us. If you want to help out a little bit more, go over to supportmypodcast.com, and there's all the usual ways of shopping through Amazon, liking us on social media. But there's two big things I want to talk about real quick. One, I'm going to be launching a listeners discount program. It's absolutely free. You don't have to buy in. You don't have to do anything. Just go to supportmypodcast.com/discounts. That's supportmypodcast.com/discounts. You'll get on an email list. I'll let you know when I'm going to officially launch that. There will be a buy-in. It'll basically, I want you to leave an iTunes review. That'll be it. If you, for some reason, don't use iTunes, can't use iTunes or whatever, we can talk via email in a different way, whether that's just liking and sharing on social media or something like that. But it's just basically a value for a value. I think that that's worth it. It's going to be things like Bitcoin wallets, VPNs, clothing, merchandise, healthcare products, things that I care about, right? And they're going to expand these beyond just Bitcoin. And by healthcare products, I mean kind of stuff that I prefer to use, MCT oils and various other things that I think are good for people for health-wise and concentration. But anyways, the other thing I want to do is today, right now, as I'm recording this, it's going to be, I believe, the 29th of April when this 2019, when this episode goes out. I am doing a fundraiser for ALS. If you don't know who Hal Finney is, Hal Finney was the first person to work on Bitcoin. He was the one who responded, the first person to respond to Satoshi. He was the first person to mine and receive a transaction. He received it directly from Satoshi. He also was the first person to talk about Bitcoin publicly. His very famous quote, just 2 words, "running Bitcoin," appeared on Twitter, and it was the first time anybody had talked about it on social media or publicly, really. Hal Finney was an exceptionally great person, but unfortunately he died in 2014 of Lou Gehrig's disease. And back then, the community kind of rallied around and did a big fundraiser to help support ALS and the ice bucket challenge and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to do that again. So if you guys could go over to Twitter, and look up the handle at Bitcoin, the number 4 ALS. That's Bitcoin 4 ALS, and it'll be called Hal Finney's ALS Drive. And we're just going to be, basically, I'm going to be launching it this coming week. So the end of the first week of May, we are going to be going live with this, so you can keep in contact with there as well. I'm going to get the website up. It's going to be Bitcoin, the number 4 ALS.com as well. Right now, as I'm recording it, there's nothing on there, but I think I'm just going to put up a basic information site on there. What it's going to be is going to be donating Bitcoin and money to the local chapter that cared for Hal. That's what his widow requested when I asked her. And so if you guys could help me out, that'd be great. I don't touch any of this money. It's going to be handled directly by the ALS Association. So there's going to be no way that I can, have any sort of malfeasance. Not that I'm that type of person, but I know people are worried about some random guy on the internet, right? So anyways, I'm going really long on this intro. So before we go to the episode, I want to say thank you for listening. And now, enjoy the show. I'm very happy to welcome back for a second time Pierre Rochard, co-host of the Noted podcast with Michael Goldstein, co-founder of the Nakamoto Institute and creator of Node Launcher and Lightning Power Users. Pierre, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So yeah, I want to talk to you about Lightning Network specifically, talk about your Node Launcher project, a little bit later on in the show. But, Lightning is something that I haven't really played around with that much, or I guess really technically at all. mostly just because of bandwidth limitations that I have mentally, to try to handle too many things. But it is something that I actually do want to do, pretty soon, because I did download the Blue Wallet app, which is, and it's custodial and everything. It's not really like actually running a real node. Um, and it's not necessarily either the optimum, I guess, true experience of running your own node. But it was
Well, we can
actually really,
discuss that.
yeah, and well, I mean, they actually have ability to connect to your own node now as well. But it was a different experience than Bitcoin, but it was, amazingly fast, and just the transaction was so cheap. I basically just opened up 2 Lightning wallets and sent them back and forth between myself just to see how And basically, it was by the time that I sent it, went to the next wallet and refreshed it, it was already there. It was, and that's kind of the centralization custodial model as well. But um, and like I mentioned, offline, episode 30 that I did a couple weeks ago was about Lightning as well. But I would appreciate, hearing your explanations. And why don't we actually start off with your explanation? You can go as narrow or wide as you'd like, on Lightning Network, what it is and how it works.
Yeah, sure. So, uh, the metaphor I use to try to very briefly explain Lightning, how it works, is this idea of if you have a contract in a business with someone, you don't necessarily, well, you definitely do not go to the courthouse every time you rely on that contract. So, like, every time you receive a payment from your employer, you don't go to a courthouse and have a judge look at the contract and then look at what your salary is and then look at what the payroll department is sending you and then say, okay, this is legally correct. Like, that would be very inefficient. And so, how the legal system works is that you go to the courthouse and see a judge when there's a dispute about the contract that you're relying on, not when the contract is just operating as all parties expect it to. So, um, Lightning and Bitcoin can be thought of as the same way, where going on chain on Bitcoin is like going in front of a judge. And you only need to do that if there's a dispute about the state of a channel in Lightning, rather than going to it every time, which is what like sending on-chain transactions for every payment is like. So basically, by having a second layer, we can have a layer that has different properties than the first, and ultimately it does rely on the first layer because a Lightning contract is simply a valid Bitcoin transaction that at any point could be broadcast to the Bitcoin network. So you'll hear Lightning developers talk about falling back on chain, or going back to the chain, because that's all Lightning does is pass around valid Bitcoin transactions. Now, obviously, there's other parts to it, but in terms of thinking about it from kind of a trust perspective and an economics perspective, it's not. It's not like it's creating an altcoin, which has been kind of a misconception where people say, oh, like it's because there's still Bitcoin transactions that you're sending around. They're just not settled in the chain yet. Although I say that, yet the opening transaction for opening a Lightning channel is settled on chain already, and that kind of anchors the payment channel. That then you update the state of the payment channel, and then once either the state is such that the channel capacity is all in one direction to one person, then you close the channel just so that you can open a new one, or that there's a dispute about what the state of the channel is, and then the participants go back on chain because the smart contract capability will let the chain know, who has the latest version versus who is trying to cheat by broadcasting an old version. But anyway, at this point, I'm rambling.
No,
So, do you have any do you want to questions about that, or do you want to go in a certain direction, because there's a million different ways to go?
Yeah, no, I mean, as long as if you are comfortable with that kind of being like the foundation of, because basically after this, I wanted to kind of, there was still some questions, and kind of the the trust but verify phrase. I try to do that, but one of the issues, and this is kind of going off on digressing a little bit, but one of the issues for non-technical people is when you're in like this trust but verify, and you go, okay, so you try to verify, but then you kind of get different explanations from different people, right? And then it gets kind of hard sometimes to be able to, refute or confirm, a concern. So sometimes I've heard other people, and on the episode before, some of these questions, had been explained to me, but I still had a few little other things I kind of forgot to ask as we were going along. But it's just something that I just wanted to, kind of clarify in my own mind. So I guess just to basically start off is the Lightning Network itself I've heard people say that it's not secure as the Bitcoin main chain. Is that correct? I mean, and if so, in what kind of degrees would you say that is correct?
Yeah, so I think that there's different ways that people use the word secure or security in the context of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies generally. So I think that if we think, so like one way they use security is in the role of miners, where they're really, what they're talking about is probabilistic transaction finality and what is the economic cost of unburying a transaction with a deep reorg in order to double spend it, kind of as a local way of cheating the system, of scamming an exchange, for example. So, like that's one way to look at security. Which, frankly, I think that applying security to that issue is a bit of a misnomer. And what we really should apply security to is people hacking your private keys. Uh, either through finding a bug in your operating system or your browser or whatever it is that's standing in between them and the private keys, or, and this is way easier, is to just socially engineer. So, for example, by sending you a phishing email saying that, like, hey, this is Coinbase, you should send us money, and then you send them Bitcoin. There are way more sophisticated phishing attempts or schemes like this, and I would argue that ICOs that are essentially exit scams, where the person raising the money immediately pockets it and just flies to Egypt and hangs out on the beach, like that. Those are the easiest ways of getting Bitcoin. Much easier than hacking. So, like, if we think about security from that perspective, I think that it's unquestionable that currently, with current technology, Lightning is less secure than a cold storage Bitcoin wallet. Now, a Lightning wallet has to be a hot wallet for just the simple reason that if you're sending payments, you have to be signing new transactions that are updating the state of channels. So if you're routing payments or sending and receiving payments, you've got to be hot, and that means that at the very least, Lightning is as insecure as any other Bitcoin hot wallet, and so you have kind of that basic level of insecurity from hotness, and then you have additional levels of insecurity due to the fact that we're dealing with very new software. And I say new, but it's funny that I say new because a lot of people have criticized Lightning for taking so long to get to where it is today. But in any case, I think it's undeniable that this software is newer than the Bitcoin software, and that means there might still be bugs in it, which might cause a loss of funds. So in that regard, Lightning is also less secure than on-chain Bitcoin. Now, the other part that we can start thinking about in terms of, so now we have the hot wallet risk that I've discussed, the implementation risk, and then just the economic risk, which are the incentives on the Lightning Network properly aligned such that participants don't abuse each other and essentially find ways of either doing like denial of service type attacks, or like opening a bunch of small channels with someone and causing problems that way. So like there's different, or then even worse on the incentive side is, what if it's the case that there's just never going to be enough liquidity for people to send payments through Lightning in an efficient manner? So like that means that it's not so much a security problem from you losing coins. It's a kind of a practicality problem of, is this system even useful for me in the first place? But in any case, those are the reasons I would cite for Lightning, broadly speaking, being less secure than Bitcoin. Now, I have this theory that eventually hot wallets will actually be considered to be, in practice, as secure as cold storage, and that the only security problem will be phishing and will be user error, and so those will be addressed, and then the Lightning implementations will continue to age and to mature, such that we'll have a good amount of confidence in their ability to not lose funds. So that, I think, will eventually trend towards being as secure as Bitcoin's implementations are. And yeah, so I think that it's not a given that off-chain will always be far more insecure than Bitcoin. But we can debate whether they'll be able to get to parity or close enough to where people say, oh, I have all of my Bitcoin on Lightning and I'm not worried about it. Versus today, where you should definitely not have all your Bitcoin on Lightning. You should have a very small amount of Bitcoin on Lightning, and don't overextend yourself in that regard. But yeah, that's my answer to that.
Yeah, my concern less, and I guess just as far as like going forward with most of these questions, is I'm less concerned with the reality at this very moment, and more in kind of what's going to be more of the reality, say a decade, I guess, from now. Although we can't ever really tell.
Yeah,
But
right.
just because.
Well,
Yeah.
I do want to focus on the present, because I do think that people are underestimating the amount of work that is ahead of us and in front of us. So like, I do want to be very clear-eyed about the current state of Lightning and not just be a cheerleader for it. And that way, we actually do end up seeing developers and businesses invest in the Lightning ecosystem, so that we do get to this future reality where we will have a very nice Lightning system.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. I'm just, I just, kind of, I guess maybe I get too ahead of myself as well. But as you stated, well, I guess so. One of the bigger concerns that I have, and this has been something that you discussed, I think, just recently, with Peter and Nick, in his episode on Lightning, as well as the fee market issue and how that's going to interact, in the future, and that will definitely affect Litecoin and not Litecoin. I'm sorry, Lightning Network, and because Lightning Network, and any second layer solution is going to, without a doubt, at least, or perhaps I'm wrong, drive up on-chain fees with volume dropping alongside the same time that we're watching block rewards dropping as well, unless we come up with some sort of other concept and fix for that in the near future. But do you think that this is going to affect the security of the main chain? I've also heard that you're of the opinion that maybe we're paying too much already for security, but wouldn't that affect be a loss of security due to fewer miners, as higher fees are needed to make mining more profitable, and that's going to somewhat drive volume even lower as well on the main chain and push it more to Lightning? And there's going to be an equilibrium that'll be reached. But the question kind of is that will that price discovery result in extremely low on-chain volume to the point where fees get to high enough where or will we have much lower security due to loss of miners? Do you think that equilibrium is going to be found? We'll find that good security, with decent fees, or do you think there's going to be a lot of kind of zigzag, up and downs on both ends of the spectrum there?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't really have a way of knowing, do we have enough security or do we have enough transaction finality or not, because every person receiving Bitcoin on using the Bitcoin network actually has a different subjective view of how much transaction finality is enough for them. Because basically, if you have a small value transaction on the Bitcoin network that gets confirmed, the odds that that transaction is coming from a miner that is going to perform a double spend attack on you are nil. So already that person, today's transaction finality is complete overkill for 99% of transactions that are going through the system. Now, what we want to look at, though, is basically what are kind of like the worst case scenarios for transaction finality. One would be if you are receiving Bitcoin from a large miner and you're an exchange. And so let's say a large miner sends you $100 million worth of Bitcoin. There you are very vulnerable to a double spend if you essentially allow them to convert into fiat or convert into another cryptocurrency or whatever it is, and transfer their funds out, and then they perform a double spend, and they might do that behind bogus identities and whatever it is. So that exchange, they're going to want way more confirmations than everyone else would, and so they don't necessarily know who is a miner and who is not either, right? They do for the most part do KYC AML, but some of these places they barely do that. So the issue there is that if Bitcoin has too little hash rate, then they will require an increasing number of confirmations. And if Bitcoin really has too little hash rate, then no number of confirmations is enough for them because the chain can just be rewritten pretty easily. So there, Bitcoin essentially becomes unusable for its purposes as a monetary instrument. So we want to stay very far away from that scenario. And we don't really have a way of knowing at what point is it so easy to double spend that exchanges are going to delist Bitcoin. Right now, no double spend on an exchange has happened with BTC, and it has happened with other smaller coins. But the way this relates to Bitcoin is my theory is that Lightning is actually going to dramatically increase demand for on-chain transactions. I say that partially based on personal experience, which is that I've performed orders of magnitude more Bitcoin transactions over the past 6 months as I've been experimenting with Lightning than I ever did in the 5 years that I was in Bitcoin before that. So already there, I just have this anecdotal data. Now, granted, you might say, "Oh, Pierre, that's a special case. Others won't have that situation." I'm skeptical. I think that a lot of people are doing a lot of on-chain transactions just due to experimenting with Lightning, and then we'll see as Lightning scales up and as its usage scales up and the velocity of payments on the network increases. What we'll see is that there is kind of an equilibrium point between on-chain transaction fees, where you're paying per the amount of data that you're using up, which is going to, broadly speaking, be the same based on how much value you're sending, versus Lightning, where you're paying fees based on the amount of channel capacity you're using. So it's based on the amount of value that you're sending, not on the amount of data that you're sending. So those are completely different fee markets, and we'll see people arbitraging between those two fee markets and making money by opening and closing channels and routing payments. But I do think that ultimately the reason that Lightning is really interesting from a Bitcoin security perspective is that the demand for on-chain transactions becomes disconnected from the value being sent. So it kind of creates an inelastic demand for on-chain transactions that is not a kind of demand that is very substitutable. So, it's not like although we can discuss atomic swaps, and maybe this will, it kind of change what I'm discussing here. But the idea being that if you've opened a channel on Bitcoin, and you've used the Mainchain to open that channel, now to close that channel, you're going to use the Mainchain as well, and you're not really going to have the ability to substitute out a different chain to close the channel with, because the smart contracts are on the Bitcoin blockchain. So in that regard, I think that inelastic demand drives up Bitcoin transaction fees and keeps them high, whereas elastic demand, where it's basically someone who's just trying to find the cheapest way to send value around, they're going to gravitate towards Lightning instead of gravitating towards altcoins, which is what we kind of saw during the last bull market, where people were like, oh, I'm using Litecoin because on-chain transaction fees for Bitcoin are too high. So I think that what we'll see is people will say, oh, I'm using Lightning because on-chain transaction fees are too high. And then it'll only be people who are essentially either, whales moving coins on-chain, or people who are having to close a channel because they want to, do some kind of channel consolidation or rebalancing or whatever happens to be the case.
Now, one of the things that kind of, we had the lightning torch going around, and it just recently ended. But one of the things that kind of confused me, and I was been meaning to ask someone, and I thought it would fit really well, obviously with this interview, was when it basically reached the last few of the torch bearers. Someone in the comments had asked why more people can't participate, and I can't remember who it was. It was Howlnot or somebody, but they basically respond saying, well, this is how Lightning works right now. What did he mean by that? I was kind of confused, and I didn't really see an answer.
Oh, yeah. No, so that's a great question. So it's actually part of the difficulty of understanding how Lightning, why there's a limit on sending a payment, is that it's a very different network than Bitcoin's network. So Bitcoin requires global consensus, which is why we saw so much debate about the 1 megabyte block size limit, and why it was so contentious. Whereas Lightning actually only requires local consensus between two channel participants, between two nodes. So that means that two nodes can set whatever rules they want. So you and I, we could go and open up the Lightning network source code, and we could change that payment size limit, and then we could open a channel to each other, and we could be sending arbitrarily large payments between you and I. Now, the problem would be that we would have to open a channel directly, with each other. We couldn't route that large payment through others because they're not following the same rules we are, if that makes sense. So those limits are coded into people's Lightning nodes. They could change them at any point, and they were put there by the developers as kind of a way of minimizing the damage if there happens to be a problem with the implementation, because we're so early on using real money.
No, that makes perfect sense. So basically, it's kind of like a like a GFCI outlet for noobs on Lightning, so they don't mess anything up too badly. So basically, if two, let's just say two exchanges, Coinbase, Binance, and Kraken, and all them there, or major institutional, entities that interact with each other, they can just open up and make kind of almost whatever rules, in a certain sense, that they want on the side, the size of the channel that they're sending back and forth to each other. It's just that no, they can't route that payment from, say, like Kraken to Coinbase and then Coinbase to my node unless I'm playing by that same set of rules. Correct, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we'll actually see, this is going to be interesting, in a future version of the LND node, they're going to have this feature called Wumbo channels and payments, where you'll be able to opt into using much larger, much higher limits, or removing the limits entirely. So that way, you won't have to go hack into the source code to do what I described. You'll be able to just set a configuration and with specific peers. So maybe it's another large exchange, or it's your employer, or whatever. You can have a very large channel.
And just to clarify just a little bit further, if these larger entities, they were sending it through, but they couldn't send it to me unless I played by the same rules. If I was sending something, so is it the channels? If you're, let's just say the differences is just in the size limit that's amounted. But if I'm only sending, let's just say 25,000 satoshis, I could still route it through theirs because it doesn't break that limit. They just can't route a larger payment than my node allows or my channel capacity is through me. Is that?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
exactly right.
All
Yeah.
right. So okay, that.
Yeah, and sorry, that's I kind of confused the two, but there's two different limits. There's the channel capacity limit, and then the payment size limit.
Okay. All right. And another thing that I had a question about was the reserve fees. So I know that kind of just a little bit on Twitter, and I know you've talked about this as well before, but that people were kind of wondering because they'd be looking and seeing that the reserve fees were fluctuating. They were going up or going down, and basically, if you had like 100,000 satoshis in a channel, and the reserve fee, let's just say, was 25,000 satoshis, that you can only use those 75,000 for routing any kind of payment and sending anything, right? That reserve fee has to stay open for that channel, on the occasion that it has to close and settle on the main network. And that's basically, the reserve fee is just there, so if that channel closes suddenly or anything like that, you can just automatically, it'll have the payment for a Mainchain transaction fee, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that this reserve fee is one of the biggest challenges in the operational complexity of Lightning, because you have to negotiate with your peer what you think the like a competitive fee for entering a block in a timely manner will be. And fee estimation, even outside of Lightning, is already a very challenging part of Bitcoin. But then you have to automate the fee estimation negotiation between peers, so that we don't enter into a situation where you say, oh, we should increase the reserve, and I'm like, no, we don't need to increase the reserve. And then the outcome of that is, all right, well, let's close the channel because we can't agree. So that's kind of which you can imagine in a scenario where if on-chain transaction fees are going up, and so fee estimations are going up, but there's a difficulty in the implementations, and it causes a bunch of channels to close because the negotiation falls through. Then that actually amplifies the problem because now you have a bunch more on-chain transactions that are driving fees even more. So we need to be really worried about and thinking about feedback loops like that between channel fee estimation, or just on-chain transaction fee estimation, and channel reserve negotiation, and what the outcome of that negotiation is from a systemic perspective if we have a lot of nodes behaving this way. So yeah, that and then the real big problem though is just how do we communicate this to the user, because there's a lot of users that they don't even know, like they don't understand, the 4 million weight unit limit on blocks, or the mempool, the backlog of transactions that's trying to get into the next block, and then attaching a transaction fee to that. Like this is a fairly complex mechanism that is very hard to communicate to users. And then on top of that, adding Lightning and this channel reserve, and having it fluctuate, where like, yeah, people are scratching their heads of why is my balance changing? Because we're not used to seeing our balance in our on-chain wallet to be changing, even though I would argue that it ought to be. What your wallet should show is what your balance is net of on-chain anticipated on-chain transaction fees of actually sending your funds. Because if your wallet shows that you have one Satoshi is your on-chain transaction balance, the on-chain balance, like what it should really show you is that you have 0 Satoshis, because that's dust and that's unspendable. And really, it should show you that you have negative Satoshis, right? Like the on-chain transaction fees would have to go down a lot for you to unlock that Satoshi and make it economically useful. So I actually think that the problem is that on-chain transaction fees or on-chain wallets have not been educating their users about on-chain transaction fees. And thus, when on-chain fees are going up, your on-chain wallet balance should actually be going down, because you have, in accounting, we call this accrual accounting, where you have to accrue the future cost of doing something. You have to accrue it today, based on what market conditions are today, rather than doing what's called cash accounting, where you only show a change in the balance when cash actually goes out the door. You should show a change in the balance when on-chain transaction fees are going up.
Yeah, it was kind of funny, because I was playing around. I was actually trying to fill. Basically, it's transferred over like this old Jack's wallet that I realized I had like $3 in or something like that, just as to use Blue Wallet. And then I was like, I'm gonna add a little bit more, and I ended up sending like $5. But the problem was I didn't pay attention to what my fee was on there, and that thing's been stuck in the mempool for like a week. It's just I'm not worried about it. Eventually, it'll make its way through. It was basically an extremely low priority transaction as the amount of satoshis per byte that I put in there. But
Yeah.
with the reserve fees, so one of my questions, I guess, with it is that in the future, and you stated that you believe that at some point, pretty much the majority of Bitcoin is going to be off chain, except for probably wealthy hodlers or institutional accounts that want to pay for that extra layer of security by having it still offline in a cold wallet, and it's for long-term hodling or whatever it is. But when we're still talking about those on-chain fees, if they go up to a certain amount, so if I had, let's say, $20 in my Lightning wallet, and a lot of people operate this way. It's not necessarily the correct way, but a lot of people don't have like a lot of money in their, especially early on in their life, in their bank accounts. They've got like 150 towards the end of the month, and they're spending those last few pennies to gas up their car. But if you had like say $20 in a Lightning wallet, and then settlement fees on chain go up to, let's just say, $100, they spike because of whatever reason. How does that work? Could that channel even stay open if the settlement fees have gone up? Let's say it was originally $5 when I put that in there. I kind of knew that going in, but if they kind of go up to $100, how you're not going to be able to use that channel anymore? Does it automatically close, or how does that actually work?
Yeah. So I think that like we're just going to have to see it in practice.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I actually this is a form of malpractice on my part, but I started learning about Lightning in October of last year, and I still haven't read through the source code of the Lightning daemon. So I actually have a bunch of open questions like that as well. But what we'll see is that the developers will adapt the source code to what's going on the network, and we'll kind of try to modify ways around that. Now, I think that like one of the most important things is on your Lightning node setting a minimum channel size, so that people don't open small channels with you that get eaten up by the channel reserve.
Okay. Yeah.
And then because like I kind of think of it as like a Lightning channel is a shock absorber for the volatility of on-chain transaction fees. And so if we're gonna, if we just had a fee spike, and I saw channels that were for 50,000 satoshis, and the whole channel got taken up with reserve. So I think that 50,000 satoshis is too small of a shock absorber, and that really people should be opening at minimum like 1 million satoshis, because then 1 million satoshis, that's a very big shock absorber. Like on-chain transaction fees could go up significantly, and you could still be routing payments through it, and not have to worry about. Now, the problem is that if the shock absorber, if they actually do close the channel on you, and then you paid out the nose in on-chain transaction fees, because that's where the fee estimation was. And that's kind of where you got to make sure that you open channels with people who are not going to close channels on you. And that, to me, is problematic because it kind of introduces an element of trust. And it's not a huge amount of trust. And hopefully the algorithms with autopilot will kind of automatically manage reputation, so that it doesn't have to be like human-based reputation, which is not great just because it's not automated. But yeah, it's going to be important to open channels with peers who have a reputation for not closing channels on you when transaction fees are high.
Now, I wanted to transition into how people can actually start to use Lightning now. What are the various ways? I mentioned Blue Wallet at the beginning, which is custodial option. I know that Jack Mahler has Zap. But then there's also actually opening up your own node. There's Casa, you have the node launcher. So why do you, if you don't mind kind of going over all the different ways that people can kind of start to actually, from education to kind of dipping their toes into kind of jumping in full feet first. Hey folks, I hope that you're enjoying this episode as much as we did recording it. I don't have any sponsors, but if you could do me a big favor and go to iTunes and leave a 5-star or a written review, that would help me out a lot. You can also help out by going to supportmypodcast.com. That's supportmypodcast.com, where you can find all the other ways that you can help out. If you actually go to the discounts tab, that's supportmypodcast.com/discounts, you can get on an early mailing list, and you will get access absolutely for free as a listener and supporter of this podcast to discounts for such things as VPNs, Bitcoin wallets, Bitcoin related clothing, as well as other kind of health products that I think are very helpful for people to just live a better life. So go over to supportmypodcast.com/discounts and sign up today.
Yeah, so I think that, like, ideally the experience would be that you start with the node launcher, and it takes you through all 3 steps from being a novice to being an intermediate user to being an expert user, if you choose to go up those steps. But that the node launcher meets kind of the UX expectations of the beginner user. Now, the problem with that today is that you currently need to do a full sync of the Bitcoin blockchain. So you need to download all 250 gigabytes of Bitcoin's blockchain before you can use your Lightning wallet with the Node Launcher. So the Node Launcher is just a desktop or laptop application for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, and it handles Bitcoin and Lightning nodes for you. It sets up Tor for you so that you have privacy, and it's just you can kind of think of it as a way of having your Lightning and Bitcoin nodes managed on your desktop or laptop for you, and at the same time, like it's not custodial. You have your own private keys on your device, so you should definitely back up your hard drive for anyone using the Node Launcher out there. Make sure you. Yeah, I mean, you should always be backing up your laptop or desktop hard drive, but it makes it even more important when you have money on it. And channels especially. So today the Node Launcher does require what's called initial block download (IBD), and downloading the whole blockchain, and that takes anywhere from like 6 hours to 2 weeks for people, just depending on how fast their internet is or how good their hard drive is. That's generally the two kind of bottlenecks for IBD. Now, once IBD is done, then they can be opening and closing the Node Launcher, and as their laptop goes to sleep and wakes back up, and it automatically syncs, and it doesn't take very long at all. Now, what I think the problem is that people start IBD and they're like, I want to get on Lightning right now, so they go use Blue Wallet or another custodial wallet. That way they can be on Lightning immediately. That's unfortunate because we have the technology to make it such that they can, while IBD is going on, still use Lightning in a non-custodial manner by using light client technology called BIP157 or Neutrino. And so this will be on Bitcoin's mainnet this year. And so it means that someone will be able to open the Node Launcher and be on Lightning in a matter of seconds, as long as it would have taken them to get signed up on a custodial wallet. And that way they have the rapid onboarding, and it's non-custodial, and they have a Bitcoin full node that is doing IBD in the background and syncing. So when their Bitcoin node is done syncing, we can turn off the light client, BIP157 Neutrino, and we can switch Lightning to using the Bitcoin blockchain, or the full verification node rather than the light client. So then I think that gets us to having the best of both worlds, where a beginner user can download this desktop application, which is as simple as Spotify or Slack. They just open it up and it just starts running, and they don't need to click anything or look at anything. It's in their system tray. On Mac OS, it's at your top right where you have the kind of the system icons, and on Windows, it's generally at the bottom right where you have the printer and all that stuff. So that way, you have your nodes running in the background locally. It's very nice setup, and you also it provides a base layer for you to then use other graphical user interfaces. So if you want to be sending and receiving payments in your web browser, you can install the Joule Chrome extension, or it works on any browser. I think Firefox and Opera and Brave and whatnot. But the Joule Chrome extension the Joule browser extension connects to your Node Launcher, so that now you can be sending and receiving payments using your own self-hosted Lightning node that you can access in a very user-friendly manner with Joule. And people have really enjoyed that UX, where you can just click a button in your browser, Joule provides a pop-up, you hit accept, and boom, the payment's gone. And I've used it a lot, and I think it's beautiful. and we're going to continue iterating on it and making it even better. Now, there's other UIs that you can use with your node launcher setup. So you can use the Zap desktop wallet, which provides a little more visibility into what's going on with your channels. Now, like it's got its own funkiness, but it's getting better. The more advanced users that really want to dig into their Lightning node data can use a web application called Ride the Lightning. Now, currently, you have to go and set it up yourself as a separate web application that you got to use the command line. It's like 2 or 3 commands, but it's still having to use the command line is a challenge for people. And I agree. I don't like the command line myself, even though I'm a developer. That's kind of why I created the node launcher, is so that I didn't have to use the command line. But I'd like to create kind of a plugins framework for the node launcher where for things that are like web applications like Ride the Lightning, there's also LN Dash, which provides nice graphs of what's going on your Lightning node. It's kind of like a dashboard. There's a number of others, probably too many for me to list, but I'd like a plugin framework that kind of allows you to manage those. And then the user who is more intermediate to advanced, who's like running a routing node and trying to optimize things, they can go and install Ride the Lightning by just clicking a button in the node launcher, and then having the web page show up in their web browser, localhost port 5000 or whatever, and using it that way, so that you have access to all the best open source tools, and it's all this layer that above the node launcher that is using Bitcoin in the best possible manner, which is with a full node, with your own Lightning node. So I'm rambling, but I think that we can create a solution that caters to beginners, to intermediate users, and to expert users, where they don't have to hop between different services. They can be using the same Lightning wallet throughout their journey as they become more and more advanced.
No, I have great confidence as far as for in the future too, because if you remember, a lot of the early applications that we saw. I mean, I wasn't, obviously neither of us were in the very early days of the internet, but even the late 90s, just kind of, the interact to even build like a basic website, all that stuff was just so pretty difficult, and most of them looked pretty terrible. They were laden with GIFs on GeoCities and all that, but now you can actually do it pretty simply. A lot of these products come out, and I think that a lot of what's to come for interaction on these. Are you, I guess, to go back a little bit, are you, as opposed to with Bitcoin Mainchain in the past, a lot of people have issues, obviously, it's not your keys, not your Bitcoin sort of thing, don't really have any kind of custodial services. But do you see that custodials are maybe not as bad for Lightning, or are they just as bad as they are on Mainchain, or is it just kind of two completely separate things and it's not apples to apples?
So I think that there's a number of different problems with custodial solutions that really speak to whether on-chain needs more self-custody than off-chain. Basically, I would say that the negatives for custodial solutions for Lightning, number one, I see is a problem of privacy. And so there is a third party that is collecting all of your payments information in some detail, and that sucks. And that means that they can get hacked, and your payments information can leak. And same problem with the banking system and bank records getting hacked, and the government hacking into bank records or subpoenaing them, or getting involved in litigation or whatever it is, or the company gets acquired by another company that resells your data and all this. So I don't think it's a good idea to give your data to third parties when you have the ability not to, if you're self-custodying. Then the other issue is the So there, to me, like, okay, the counter argument would be, well, it's really nice to have someone else backing up your data because what if you accidentally lose your data? So there, it's like, well, okay, that's plausible, but I'm not so sure about that. You should be able to confidently and reliably back up your own data, and if it really is such an important thing for you, having off-site backup where we have a backup in Australia and in Europe, or so there. And also, like, the other thing is that third parties can lose your data as well. Recently, it was found out that this old social network that people used to be on called MySpace, it had a heavy like music component to it, and it was found out that a lot of the early audio tracks that people had posted on MySpace were no longer available. They had accidentally deleted that data in kind of a database upgrade. So third parties can lose your data. They can accidentally delete it. It's not just the problem of them like giving it to someone else, which is kind of them sharing it, which is strangely like the opposite problem of them deleting it would be them copying it. But anyway, so those are problems. And then the issue of people, losing your funds. Like if someone else is holding your money, they can lose your money. Now, you could argue that for a lot of people, it's actually the bigger problem is them losing their own money. Like they have poor key management and they accidentally delete their funds. So there's arguments in both directions on this particular issue of who can more securely hold coins. Is it a professional service provider that has a dedicated security team that is staying on top of things? Or is it an individual user? Because you could argue that a lot of individual users are better than an institution holding the money, just from the insider risk. Like, you don't have any insider risk when it's yourself, because it's your own money. But an exchange always has insiders that could potentially take your coins, and we saw this with Quadriga CX in Canada, where the funds disappeared, potentially from an inside job. We don't know yet. But there's a rich history in Bitcoin of exchanges getting hacked and losing funds. So that's a problem as well. Now, is that worse for Bitcoin? I think it is worse for Bitcoin because you're holding more value on Bitcoin, right? On Lightning, you should be holding very little value because it's just kind of your checking account, your walking around money, the cash in your wallet. Whereas Bitcoin is kind of like the gold bullion that you are storing for long term. So there's the store of value. So there, you could say, well, because you're using Bitcoin as a store of value, you need to hold your own keys, and that way you minimize the risk of the funds getting hacked, or the cost of the funds getting hacked is much higher on Bitcoin than on Lightning. So that's an argument for why maybe it's okay to have custodial Lightning wallets. Now, the other argument for why it might be okay to have custodial Lightning wallets is the difficulty of channel management. And so, it's better for your ability to send payments if you aggregate your liquidity with others. So instead of opening one channel for 1 million Satoshis, what if you get together with, hundreds of other people and open, 12 channels with, 12 million Satoshis each? So that way, your likelihood of having a transit or having a payment route, it goes up a lot. So that's a problem, right? We should have features on the Lightning Network like atomic multipath, like improved autopilot, so that people don't have this problem of how to open channels strategically so that they maximize the likelihood of routing payments. So that's another argument for why it might be better at this point to have custodial Lightning wallets. I mean, that to me, though, people should be experimenting. People should be trying something out, new that they've never done before when they're using Lightning. And so if they're experimenting, then to me it doesn't make sense that you would only go with a custodial wallet. I think or only go with a non-custodial wallet. I think you should try both. And the only reason to not use a custodial wallet in the context of experimenting would be if you're having to KYC AML yourself, and then now you're just creating a big liability for yourself just when you should be experimenting in a positive way. And I say the same thing about running a full node and whether you should use a Nautilate node or build your own Raspberry Pi or use a Casa node. You should be experimenting. So try all of those if you want to try them, or really experiment with running a node on your own hardware that you already have. So we've seen people experiment with installing a Lightning node on an Amazon Fire Stick, or we have all these devices around us, these laptops and desktops. You might have an old device in an attic that you could turn on and see if you can run a full node on it. So and then you could run a Lightning node on top of that. So I think that experimentation is if that's the spirit by which we're going into this, we should be trying both custodial and non-custodial. And really, the biggest issue I have, I think, with custodial is the decentralization aspect of it. Is we're doing this because we want things to be decentralized, because we know that trusted third parties are security holes, and the long term are harmful to users. So if we want to have a decentralized system, we should be trying to make it as easy as possible to do things non-custodially and to do things in a self-hosted manner.
But that was actually the last question that I had. Did you have any kind of closing thoughts? How should people you mentioned go to Node Launcher. Is that really where you think their first stop should be if they go I would like to learn more about Lightning and start using it, that they should head over to Node Launcher?
Yeah, so I there's different points of view on this, but my point of view is that I learn best when I do things, not when I just read a book or read a website. So that's where I think that you should just go. I think if you Google at this point, if you Google Node Launcher, let's see, just Google Node Launcher, and it's the first link, the releases. Download it. Now there is a guide. I mean, the guide has gotten shorter and shorter as I've simplified the Node Launcher, and so now you just need to download the app, open the app, and then it'll start doing its thing, and you can just leave it alone. Now, if you can start clicking around if you want to kind of explore what's going on. But it automatically starts initial block download, and then it automatically starts your Lightning wallet. So that's where I would recommend people start. And then while it's syncing, while the full node is syncing, go and start digging into the technical side of Bitcoin. So what I would do is just Google technical side of Bitcoin. I have a Medium post called Understanding the Technical Side of Bitcoin. And it has a bunch of links in it to people explaining Bitcoin on a more granular level than the usual platitudes that we get about decentralization and blockchain technology and all this. So I'd highly recommend working through that Medium post so that you can build up an understanding of what makes the Lightning Network so special. Why is it that these smart contracts are even possible? What are the features that are being used on the Bitcoin blockchain that is enabling these contracts? It's a fascinating world to dive into. And if you're interested in Bitcoin because the price has gone up a lot, and that's what appeals to you, I think that it behooves you to understand what the fundamentals are driving this are. And the fundamentals really are about the technology and what it enables. And so I would highly recommend that you stop looking at the price charts for a little bit and start educating yourself on both how Bitcoin works and why that's different than other systems, both centralized systems like the current Federal Reserve System or other fiat currencies or the historical gold standard, but also being able to compare it to how other cryptocurrencies use this technology, and seeing like who do you believe regarding monetary policy? Who has the most credible monetary policy? Is it Bitcoin or is it all these other altcoins? I think that ultimately comes back to the technology, which is how are consensus rules formed and enforced and automated through these networks. But anyway, I could go on about this stuff for decades. Thanks for having me on your podcast. If your listeners are looking for more podcasting, check out the Noted podcast that I co-host with Michael Goldstein. Michael Goldstein is the founder and president of the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. So definitely go to nakamotoinstitute.org and read everything that's been written about, read everything that's been published on the Nakamoto Institute. Obviously, not everything that's been written is on there. But check that out. I think that people, like everything in Bitcoin has already been discussed in a way. Like if you go back and look at old Bitcoin Talk forum posts, like all of the scaling stuff, all of it, it's been discussed for years now. Like, and people, start entering this space during bull markets, or there's always new people coming in, and they think that like, and I thought this as well. So like in 2013, when I was learning a lot about Bitcoin, I would hear people debating things and I'm like, oh, this person is having new ideas. But no, they're just rehashing debates that happened in 2011 or 2010 or 2009. So like I argue that there's like almost nothing new going on in Bitcoin in terms of debates. But there's a lot new going on in terms of technology. In any case, go to the Nakamoto Institute, learn about the debates, read up some. I've posted posts in the mempool, and these are like little blog posts. And now they're like getting old, and it's making me feel old. But the first one that I specifically wrote about Bitcoin was in February 2013, which is already 5 years ago. It's crazy to me, because like when I still think of myself as like being new to Bitcoin, and then people who were in it in 2011, like Trace Mayer and whatnot, like those are the OGs, not me. But now people like refer to me as an OG, which is just mind-boggling to me. So, but anyway, these are, I think that they've held the test of time, but there's predictions in there that have not played out yet, like hyper-Bitcoinization and whatnot. So we'll see about that. The Noted Bitcoin podcast, and also check out obviously my Twitter at Pierre_Rochard. I spend way too much time on Twitter, but it's a lot of fun. And let's see, do I have anything else to show? If you are looking for inbound capacity for your Lightning node, so that's if you're receiving payments or you're wanting to route payments, then definitely go to lightningpowerusers.com. And if you have a channel open with me already, I'll open a channel in your direction. Or if you want a channel in your direction and you want to pay for the capacity, you can do that too. And yeah, check out the Joule Chrome extension, I think, or browser extension. I think that it's really the best way to interact with the Lightning Network and with the node launcher that's available right now.
Yeah, and I have, or I should say, I will have links to everything that we discussed, the podcast Twitter handles, Lightning Power users, and everything else. I've been keeping notes as we've been talking. So if you go to digiknowcrypto.com, you'll see this will be episode 33, and all the notes will be down in there. And once again, Pierre, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Hey folks, thank you for listening to this episode of the Did You Know Crypto podcast. I really thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. As I said at the very beginning, if you could do me a big favor, go to bitcoin4als.com and see how you can help with this ALS fund drive in Bitcoin and or cash through the ALS Association. If you don't see anything there directly, just go later on in the week, probably around May 4th. It'll all be live. I'll have all the information on there. You can also go onto iTunes and leave me a 5-star and a written review. That would help out as much. But please, really, if you can only do one thing for the next couple of weeks, go over to Bitcoin for ALS. Let's show Fran Finney, his widow, how much this community really appreciates all that Hal did to bring Bitcoin to reality. And once again, thanks for listening.